Okay, welcome to ProOrganic's speaker meeting for this month. And the meeting is being recorded as of now. So if everybody can please stay muted. Going on everything. So if everybody can stay muted unless you're talking. So you'll see on the screen right now that we have our two sponsors back for 2023, the Bluff Restaurant, which is up going up towards Cristo Rey. The Bluff has graciously offered to host our annual general meeting, and we had our Christmas party there. So they've been a big help to us as far as a kind of a central meeting place for us. The Belize Ag Report is also a sponsor. We kind of go hand in hand with a lot of the things that we have in common and that we strive towards. So we appreciate both of their sponsorships. Today's meeting will be organic farming and gardening. You can do it too. Our speaker is Stephen Hochstetler. Hope I said that right. Of CC Farm out. He's close to Spanish Lookout. And Stephen he's going to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about how he's got into organic farming. And as he puts it, it's just kind of in his blood. So I guess that's a good start. And it's definitely his passion, one of them. So he's going to give us a little bits and tell us how we can do it too. So just a couple of stay muted because the presentation is being recorded. And we will have a question and answers a couple of times during the talk. If you can submit your questions for Stephen in the chat option. So you just click on the chat and you can send it to everyone, because you can also send an individual message. But if you send your questions to everyone, and then Stephen kind of has two segments that he's going to talk about. So what he said he would like is you can submit your questions anytime, kind of as they pop into your head. And then at this first segment, he'll take any questions about that first segment. And then again, after the second segment, he'll take any more questions. So I'll let him know what questions there are and he'll answer them for us. And just a little about ProOrganic. Our Facebook page and Facebook group for details and discussion. And then Karen has done an excellent job with our website, pro-organicbelize.org. On the website, you can find information about how to join ProOrganic for the year. Also about our consumer group, where you can get on a couple of list for being able to pre-order some organic or pesticide-free produce each week. And Stephen's also going to give us information about how we can order his, because he does the same thing. And find all that on the website. Another thing you can find on the website is all of the speaker meetings that we've done. Is, I guess, a good thing about COVID was that we had to revert to Zoom meetings instead of in person. So we've been able to have people from all over Belize and outside of the country talk to us about different gardening and farming topics. And we do record all of them. So you can go on the website, look for speakers, and you'll be able to go back and revisit any of the speaker meetings that we've had for the last couple of years, over 2 years now. So it's a great resource. And just to kind of give a little plug, next month in April is the ProOrganic Belize annual general meeting. It will be held at the Bluff at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. We usually do 3 in the afternoon, but the Bluff gets kind of busy. So we're doing 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning. So that's where we'll vote in the new board and just do our general meeting. So anybody who is already a paid member is more than welcome to attend, and we encourage you to. All right. So You might want to jot down Stephen's WhatsApp number, because I do know that he sends out messages about what produce he has available and when and where to pick it up. So 501-671-4779 to get on his list. And Stephen, I will turn this over to you, and you can enlighten us.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And please, Guinea, if you want to, if you notice anything or you want to butt in at any point, please do so. I hope y'all can hear me well. Sometimes my internet out here on the farm isn't the best. I do have a backup for today, just in case this connection goes, I can connect up to another connection. So hopefully we don't have any trouble with that. First of all, I'd like to introduce myself a bit. I was born and raised in the US. I came to Belize when I was about 23 years old, and got married here, raised my family here. It's been about 12, almost 13 years now here in Belize. And here in Belize, I've been mostly involved in construction. So most of my time has been in construction. But growing up in the US was primarily growing organic vegetables. We did, from the time I was just a kid till I left the US, we were growing organic vegetables on a commercial scale for a large retail market in Tennessee. And so yes, like was said, I sort of have it in my blood. I really enjoy growing and picking and eating organic vegetables. I'm a farm boy, and I love the farm. Just to sort of get started, one of my frustrations after having been raised on an organic farm, my frustration has been not only with the chemical farmers, but also with many organic farmers that seem to overcomplicate things. And that you will probably hear through this meeting, you'll be hearing me emphasize that a lot. Emphasize the point that it's not complicated, it's less complicated. And you will do better if you don't overcomplicate things, but rather work with nature and focus on the soil. Before I dive into that, does anybody have any questions concerning, any questions about, any questions that they want to ask me personally about my time in Belize or anything like that? I would gladly give a little time for that if somebody has a question.
So Stephen, I have a question. I know you're out from Spanish Lookout a little bit. And when you first came to Belize, did you land there, or were you going to another part of the country? And did you immediately start your farm?
Actually, to answer that, very good question. When I first came to Belize, I met my wife in Stand Creek, and that's where we got married, and we lived the first 6 years. As I started my construction business, I did not have a farm. I sort of started from the bottom here in Belize and saved doing construction. I was able to make some money, and we saved until I was able to purchase the farm about close to 2.5 years ago. And so we have been out here on the farm now for about 2 years and are still building. We're still trying to finish our house here. And we started planting. So I really only have about 1 year, year and a half of planting here at the farm. But the other places we've been, like in Stand Creek, we did have our own little home garden. And so we have pretty much gardened every year since we're here, but not really to sell. It was just a small backyard garden. So this is like, we're about a year and a half in growing vegetables to sell, and here on this farm at CC Farm. and we've really enjoyed it. The soil is still in the building up process. We are making progress, but it is not yet where we would like to see it. But it is behaving as expected, and we are very enthusiastic about the progress.
Did you have any preconceived idea when you moved to Belize about how how little organic produce is available here, or were you already aware of that?
No, I was not aware. To be honest, I had a misconception that a lot of people would probably not be using chemicals. I spent some time in Springfield and in Barton Creek, and I found that they have chemical licenses, most of them, and everybody depends on chemicals to raise their vegetables. They try to stay with regulation as required with chemicals, but many of the Spanish farmers and the local farmers, they'll just spray, they'll slip it in whatever's needed to try to get a crop, and that means oftentimes picking right the same day or day after spraying, not using the required withdrawal times, like withdrawal periods where most chemicals are up to 2 weeks and so forth. But and so that scared me, and that's the main reason that I immediately started growing food for my own family in our own backyard, because I didn't trust the food that was out there. Secondly, the main reason I got into construction at the beginning was because I wanted to get back into farming, and it was one means that I saw my way through to be able to make the money to buy a farm sooner. And since my main focus is on the soil, my investment is the soil. And so I didn't want to build up somebody else's farm only to have to leave it and do it all over again on my own at some point. So I focused my time on construction and became a contractor and have done large construction throughout the country for several years now. And at the beginning, I didn't really like construction. My heart's always been in farming. That was the very reason I got into construction. But now that I do have my farm, there's certain parts of the construction I still enjoy, so I don't expect to ever completely stop construction. But I want to grow vegetables for two reasons. One, for food for my own family, and secondly, to sort of prove everybody and give an opportunity to teach everybody around here that I know that it is possible and that they can do it too. You know, it's not impossible like everybody says. And so it has sparked a lot of interest, and we do seminars here on the farm periodically, teaching people how, and do like a farm tour and questions and answers period. We also have been given the opportunity to just this past weekend, we were at a science expo at one of the schools, where several different schools came together and had like a science expo, which was great. It was also a great opportunity to connect with people. So I'm looking for ways to convince everyone that it is possible, and it isn't harder. It's actually easier than the chemical method. And I think I know I've said this to some of you all already, that my struggle or my frustration is not only with the chemical farmers, it's also with many of the organic farmers that believe that you have to do a lot of different complicated things. You got to spray this, spray that, and you're trying to beat the bugs, rather than working with nature and let things go their natural way and focus on the soil so that the plants themselves are healthy enough to combat and to have a natural immunity against the disease and pests. And we'll dive into it, and I think as we go along, you will understand what I'm talking about. Any other questions? So I see a message says, how often do we do teachings at the place here? I usually post them on the group, on the WhatsApp group. It's been about 2 months now. I've been so busy. been aiming to do it once a month, but it's been about 2 months since the last one, approximately. I'd have to look at the date to remember exactly, but it's been a while. I would like to do one about every month. So I would like to mention this. I'm very new to Zoom. I love face-to-face. I love it out here on the farm a lot better, you know, face-to-face, talking to people. But I think we'll get the hang of it here. So I'd like to get started with the main focus of this meeting will not even be on plants, it'll be on the soil. The soil is, having a focus on the soil is the key to being successful organically. And I can't emphasize this point. I just want to say it again. There is nothing more important in no focus more important in organic farming than a focus on the soil. Because if the soil is what it has, the capacity that it needs to have, and has the health that it needs to have, anything that you plant in it, any seed you put in it, is gonna grow. Obviously, you can have good seed and bad seed. You want good seed, taking into consideration that you have good seed. First of all, I'd like to talk about tilling. The tilling, I'll just run through the topic of soil preparation and soil care first, and then I'll open it up for questions again. So I'll get started. Tilling is very important. I am not a huge fan of no-till farming at all. No-till mostly came along. I'm not saying it can't be done. First of all, I'd like to admit I don't have any experience with no-till. The few times that I've neglected tilling, I've seemed to have less results, poorer results in actual production than if I till regularly. So the method I'm used to and that we have always used is tilling. We usually we prefer any machinery used that does not compact the soil. A very important part of soil health is for it to be aerobic. That means that it's aerated, it has oxygen in the soil. An anaerobic soil is a soil that is compacted, lacks air, lacks oxygen, becomes compacted, and normally falls to a whole bunch of problems like fungus and acidity, and just a lot of problems. The roots can't get in. The roots have a hard time developing. It's a problem. So one thing that affects the soil compaction is the way that tilling is done. The discs, any kind of disc harrow or disc plow, tends to compact. Discs do have their purpose. We normally only use them, let's say after a corn crop, just to sort of cut up the dry stubble and so that it can be integrated back into the field. But that's usually right after a crop, and you want to be very careful that the soil is dry enough. Soil moisture when tilling is the next point. It's very important because if you till too wet, the soil needs to be dry enough. You need to know your soil. Different soils will feel differently when they're dry enough, but you do not want to till wet, because tilling wet compacts as well, and it makes hard clods, and in domino effect, it destroys microbes. So don't till too wet. Um, the other thing is tilling deeply. Normally what we use for tilling is a moldboard plow. That's the old typical traditional plow that digs in underneath and flips the soil, preferably 6 to 8 inches deep, and then let it sit for one rain or 2 rains, and then go over with a spring tooth harrow or some mechanism to till the soil to sort of make the seed bed. We would often, the last thing we would pass over would be like a drag. So behind the harrow or the cultivator, we would drag a little, like a wooden beam or something that would just sort of flatten the area. All right, so that would make our seed bed. That's in soil preparation. Sometimes it would take twice. We would go over it twice with the cultivator till the seed bed was, the soil was ready for a nice soft seed bed. But always preferably the mechanisms, the machinery that we would use would be machinery that would loosen the soil or put air in the soil. And it's fairly simple to understand it. Any machinery that cuts downward compacts. Any machinery that sort of gets underneath and lifts up, it aerates the soil. It keeps it fluffy and loose, which is important. The rain helps break it up, and then so it's important to try to prepare the soil early enough so you have enough time for the process to properly take place, because preparing the soil can take a month before it's ready to plant. So you want to, as you're planting before you're ready to plant seed, you want to at least till a month before. After tilling, what we normally do is, let me backstep just a little bit. Soil amendments would need to be all put in before tilling. Before plowing, we spread a little bit of animal manure or lime, depending what the soil needs. We put a little bit of manure and lime. You could put compost. Anything that you put on the soil would be good to put on before you plow it, so that you plow it under. And then the last thing before planting, we mulch. And mulching is basically just taking grass clippings or old hay. Do not use wood chips or sawdust or any type of wood shavings. It will fight for and compete for nitrogen from your plants in the soil, because any fiber requires nitrogen to break down, and grass has enough nitrogen in itself to break down itself, and so therefore it does not take away from the soil or compete or negatively affect it all. It doesn't have a negative effect on the plants. I'm sure I'm missing something, but so first it's soil amendments, then we have plowing, and then cultivating and dragging until you have your seed bed. Now, if it's rainy season, if you're preparing soil for rainy season, it's best to put most of your plants on little ridges, because your roots, if they're sitting in too much water and rain all the time, they will be more prone to disease, and they'll stress out, because no plants want to have their roots. None of the vegetables really like to have their roots just sitting in water all the time. So if you have a little bit of a ridge, the water, yes, will make the ridge wet, but it'll soak away real quick, and it won't just be sitting. The roots won't just be sitting in it. If it's preparing soil for dry season, like right now, I didn't make any ridges. I left everything flat, because if I would make ridges, then the ridges will just be drier, even drier than the soil around it, and it'll create even more need for irrigation. And so depending on what time of the year that you are preparing the soil for, that's how you would shape the soil to get it ready. Last of all, I mentioned earlier, is mulching. Mulching is the single most important part of the process. It is what makes organic gardening possible for me, and I can't overstress that. I want to spend a little bit of time. This is the last point on soil preparation. You have your amendments in, you have your seed bed prepared, you have everything there, and most people, what they'll do is they'll go out there and they'll plant in the bare, naked soil. And what's going to happen is the sun hits that soil, it dries up the surface, it basically drives the microbes lower or kills the ones that can't migrate. It burns up humus. The sun burns up humus at the surface that stays open and exposed to the sun for too long a period of time. So you're actually depleting your soil from humus. Humus is decomposed organic matter, and we call humus the soil's bank account, because basically what humus also helps do is any nutrients that you put in the soil, like manures or lime, instead of letting the rain leach it out, the humus grabs onto it and holds it there for it to be available to the roots when they need it. And so humus is an extremely important part of our soil. Compacted and anaerobic soils do not have much humus. And that's one of the biggest problems, because no-till just works the surface and it just keeps burned off, it just compacts everything and it becomes burnt by the sun and everything's naked. With large row crops, it is difficult to mulch it like corn and beans. And so most farmers can't do that. But if there would be other ways, like for large farmers, there's other ways that they can do that, like we did as well. We raised corn and beans growing up. We would not mulch the corn. Instead, we would do a cover crop, let it grow up like a grass, a wheat or a rye or something like that. Here we could do beans, certain types of fertilizer beans. There's all kinds of stuff for cover crops. And you can periodically, each piece, you can put a cover crop on it and plow it under. That puts humus back in, and you can grow healthy corn every year without all these fertilizers. Soil doesn't have to go downhill. It can go up. Soil does go up. With this process, it does always improve. It can take 2 to 3 years before your soil is in its optimum capacity. And then it takes very little to maintain it at that capacity. Let's continue with mulching. Mulching, whenever I speak of mulching, I'm talking about grass clippings or old hay. It's super important, because after you got your ridge in, or no ridges, whatever, after the soil's prepared and you put mulch on, many of your vegetables we start in trays in the greenhouse. So the seedling is already maybe 2 to 3, 4 inches high by the time we planted in the field. And so by that time, the field has already been prepared. The hay has already been put down. The grass mulch or whatever has already been put down, and the rain has gotten a couple rains, which compacts it down to possibly like an inch and a half to 2 inch layer. When we put it on, it's more like 6 inches of hay, but it compacts down to like 2 or 3 inches of hay and a nice sealed, very sealed film over all the soil. And then we just open up a little hole and pop the seedling down through into that moist soil. So what exactly does the hay do? First of all, it keeps the weeds down. That's the obvious thing. There's no weeds. You don't have to go out there and weed your garden. So it cuts out that huge job. You don't have to do any weeding. When you walk through the garden in the evening, like when I come home from construction sites in the evening and I walk through the garden, I'm maybe pulling up a weed here and there a little bit, and mostly just enjoying the walk. From the time we plant to the time we pick, there's almost zero work. We just don't do anything. There's nothing to do. We don't spray. We don't weed. There's nothing much to do. And I know many of you, that's not been your experience, but that's what mulching can do for you. Now, the first question you might ask, well, doesn't mulching invite fungus or some kind of bacterias or some kinds of pests like slugs or different things like that? Our experience has just never been that. The bacterias and the funguses the bacteria and the fungus that break down organic matter are not the same ones that attack your plants. So you don't have to worry about that. And if your soil is healthy enough and is full of healthy microbes and bacteria, they'll chase out the bad ones. There's not space for both of them to live. And so it takes care of that. We don't, so now we spoke about weeds. Second point that mulching is it keeps the soil moist. keeping the soil moist does more than one thing. If the moisture stays close to the surface, first of all, you don't have to irrigate as much. The irrigation is just not as much of a problem. Just this morning, we sold 70 pounds of lettuce, head lettuce, to FTC, and we've had 2 months almost of dry here, and we still haven't irrigated. Yes, the soil is starting to get dry, but just as proof of point, we didn't irrigate because I wanted to see how long it's going to last. We still had a crop. The heads weren't quite as big and quite as nice as they would have been in rainy season, but they were still sellable and they were great. So that is one very important point. The other is that moisture invites those microbes to stay close to the surface, right where they are needed. Because the microbes break down nutrients to make them available for the plant roots. So you need that surface to be moist so that the plants have enough nutrition. Because if plants stress out, their immune system goes down and they become very vulnerable to pests and disease. So it's extremely important that plants have those microbes close to their roots. The other thing is that if the microbes are close to the surface, then they are also right there under that mulch where they have their food and they can reproduce and they can prosper. So mulching is very, very beneficial. And finally, once the mulch breaks down, by the time the crop is over, the grass mulch is usually decomposed enough to where you can just plow it under, and the whole cycle starts over again. So now each year that you have the mulch getting mixed into the soil, after 2 or 3 years, your soil doesn't even resemble what it looked like at the beginning, because it becomes loose and fluffy, and the organic matter is a large part of the soil. It builds up in the soil, and so your soil becomes very fertile. So that is the important. That's why mulching is very important for me. We do a lot of mulching. We mulch most everything. Now there's a few things that you can't really mulch with as much, but we also are planting. We don't plant the same thing in the same place every year. We move stuff around. We rotate a lot. So, but there's a few things that are hard to mulch with, like let's say carrots or cilantro or corn that's directly seeded into the ground. There you can't mulch before. So you prepare the soil, you plant your seed, you let it grow up. If you want to mulch still yet, then you would mulch after the plant is up just a little bit, and you mulch in between the rows. But your directly seeded plants would have to be mulched after planting. The only things that we mulch beforehand are for plantings that we would be planting seedlings into like transplanting seedlings into the soil. Hopefully I'm not being misunderstood. Please, any questions? That's pretty much the gist of it for the soil. I have a question here. What crops do you most recommend for the backyard gardener or small scale farmer in Belize for success? There are certain crops that are easier in Belize and certain ones that are harder. I think any gardener would agree. Now, I would still recommend you trying different things, because your particular soil, in the condition it might be presently, may not. There may be something that grows better in your soil than in your neighbor's soil or somebody else. There are, for certain soil types, there are certain plants that do better. And so I would still recommend you trying what grows better and trying different things, and then sticking with the ones that do good and keep improving your soil, and then keep trying those seeds those crops that did not do well in the first year. And then as you go along each year, there'll be new things that didn't do good before that will do good, because as the soil completely balances and it becomes very fertile, as it improves, it should be able to grow anything. Once it's where it needs to be, almost anything will do well. But some of the easier crops would be like cabbage and cucumbers, There would be like squash, um, cilantro. There's more things that are easy. Somebody that I didn't have a list right here in front of me. Some of the harder items would be like tomatoes and peppers. For a small scale farming, the tilling method that I would use would be like these tilling forks that actually pierce down. You stand on them and it pierces down, and you pull the soil up, and it sort of loosens it, sort of flips it. It doesn't completely flip it, but that's okay. It gets that air down in there and sort of breaks up the soil. What I've used sometimes is just a good old-fashioned shovel. Spread some stuff, your amendments on top, and use a shovel and flip the soil if you're doing just a small bed or if you're doing small scale gardening. We are mostly planting. There's another question asking, are you planting in an open environment? We had a greenhouse last year that we had a bumper crop of tomatoes that we harvested, but the hurricane smashed it. I should have taken the plastic off, and it was my mistake. And because the plastic was on, it just collapsed the greenhouse. It was a large greenhouse, and we were building it back. We were putting it back up. But even so, even with a greenhouse, I do not recommend. I don't recommend closing it in. Plants need insects. We need the good insects terribly bad. Tomatoes can be pollinated with vibration, like some people try, but I have seen it over and over again that it's just not the same. They don't pollinate as well, and so you don't have your plants just loaded down with tomatoes the way we have. Again, if we're scared of insects, let me remind you that insects they will always go to the sick plant first. So focus on the soil, make sure your soil is healthy, and you will get a bumper crop. So even in our greenhouse, all I used the greenhouse for was for the tomatoes, especially. They just out in the open, they have a hard time because of the sun and the rain. Too much rain or too much heat will stress the plants out, make them weak, and bugs can take over. We have gotten just last week we ended our last tomato crop, and I would say we still had a good crop, but it was probably only half as much as we did last year in the greenhouse. And this year it was out in the open. It was just out in the open. We still had tomatoes. We had lots and lots of cherry tomatoes, lots and lots of these, like the big beef, like the beef steak type tomato. But it was not nearly as good as in a greenhouse. And once the crop starts ripening, here's the other problem. When you have this hot Belizean sun directly beating down on those tomatoes, those green tomatoes, they'll sunburn. They also get yellow shoulder, which is this yellow on one side that stays yellow deep into the tomato, and that's caused by too much sun. And they can just outright sunburn, and then you can't sell it. You can't sell the product. And so what we used on the greenhouse last year was, and this same thing I want to set up again, it worked very well. We left the sides and the end open of the greenhouse so that insects can come and go as they liked. Bees came in and pollinated, everything took care of itself. But what we did have is we had greenhouse plastic that we bought from Agri-Vet, I believe it's called, in Cayo, I think. And it had shade in it. So I think it was like 40 or 50% shade. It had some shade. And then it also kept off the rain. And then I drip irrigation from my ponds that I could put water. And then even in the greenhouse, we didn't have to irrigate much because the tomatoes were mulched, and there was very little water evaporation. We used drip tape underneath the mulch, and so there was just very little water loss. The water that we put there was utilized, and we only watered maybe once a week. Had very good crop. So mulching is super important. I want to explain a little bit about the natural immunity, how the natural immunity of a plant works in as it relates to pests. The science behind it is actually sort of funny. You know, insects are very allergic to alcohol. So what happens is the bug gets up on the plant. The sugar content or the Brix of the plant is high because it's healthy, and the bug takes a bite. And as it's sitting there, there's a little droplet of juice comes out and it hits the air, and its sugar content is high enough, it'll turn into the slightest amount of alcohol. It'll turn alcoholic, and the bug will eat that, and it will literally make him his reproduction slow down, his movement slows down. For cucumber beetles, I've literally seen some. I have sprayed with foliar feeding sometimes, like with molasses or fish emulsion. Molasses, if you foliar feed with molasses, it sort of helps boost the Brix, the sugar content in the plant a little bit naturally. And I have used it on cucumbers, and I have literally seen the next day where the cucumber beetles were laying on their backs on the ground, just slowly kicking, you know, and barely any movement. They were drunk. They were a little physically drunk, and that slows them down. It's not. It doesn't kill them, but it slows them down enough where population doesn't repopulation doesn't happen very fast, and you get a crop. The point again is to do what it takes to keep the plant healthy, to focus on the plant health, and to do so it starts in soil preparation and soil health. Now this might lead a little bit to plant care, which we're going to speak about in a minute, but I do occasionally use a backpack if I see that the plants need a little bit of a boost. There's too much heat or too much cold and they're stressing out and they need a little extra boost. I give them some fish emulsion, liquid calcium, kelp, and kelp seaweed if I have it. I haven't been able to get any here in Belize yet, but in the US we could go on some of these organic places. They have kelp seaweed in a water soluble kelp seaweed that you can literally put in the drip irrigation, or in use it for foliar feeding with spraying. So I would do a 4-way mix with kelp seaweed, liquid calcium, fish emulsion, and the molasses. That was my miracle mix, and I could spray if plants were a bit stressed out. I could spray them with that, and you could see a difference within a day. They would just brighten up, they'd green up, it just sort of helped them through any of the stress. And we would often do that if we were going to have a late frost, because kelp seaweed really helps plants against harsh weather conditions. It boosts their immune system. The kelp seaweed literally would sometimes make the difference between if we had a late frost, whether the tomato plants that we had already planted in the field would make it or not make it. And so that was a great product. And also in the middle of the summer when they were getting stressed out by a lot of heat, it would help carry them through. So we have another question. So yes, we are planting in the open right now. Everything's in the open. I would like to have shade because of the heat. Like lettuce and cabbage, and especially like the lettuce we'd had right now would have done better. They would not have bolted or went to seed as easily and as quickly if we would have had shade cloth. I do have some shade cloth. We will probably be putting some up for the next time. Mulch is a fertilizer at the end. So at the end of the mulch's lifespan, it becomes a fertilizer. Yes. There's a question asking if mulch works as fertilizer. Yes. Eventually, when your soil is fertile, then you won't need to be adding much of anything else. Mulch itself will help. You might have to add a little natural fertilizer to the area or the field that you're cutting your mulch from, so you can continue having good mulch. But after applying manure to the soil, how long will it take to decompose, or what is the time period before transplant? So I don't usually give it more than just what it takes for the soil to be properly tilled and prepared. I put on manure and lime, and I don't put on so much. Like, you don't want to put on so much that it will drastically change the soil condition, because it can upset the microbes, it can upset something. So I plan on not trying to fix my soil or trying to get it as good as, putting all that manure in 1 year. No, I would prefer spreading it out over numerous times, little by little, so that my microbes aren't upset and nothing is imbalanced and everything just sort of flows. And I aim at about 3 years time. In about 3 years, I hope to have my soil at its optimum capacity. Asking if I do soil tests after I purchase the farm. So my soil, my farm was completely neglected. There was not even a road to it. There was a public access. There was no road to it. I had to build a bridge over a creek to get to my farm. I had to build the concrete bridge. And any of you that have been to the farm will remember the bridge as you get to my house. Everything had been neglected. Years and years ago, they had cleared the land and planted Mombasa grass for cattle. But in the last 5, 6, 7 years, it didn't even have cattle on it. It didn't have a fence, didn't have fences kept up. Everything was just grew up in brush and grass, high Mombasa grass, and we had to sort of tame everything back down. Let's see. I did do a soil test to answer that question. I did do one soil test, and just to sort of prove, because others in the area had done soil tests and said that typically there was certain deficiency or certain things lacking. And so I did one soil test just to verify that. I was short. I'm low in sulfur. Other than the NPK, some NPK, nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, I have deficiency in sulfur, manganese, and copper, and I have not added any. My experience is, and I don't understand it, modern science wants to teach us that if your soil needs something, then there's no other way but you're gonna have to go buy it from the big store and come put it in. And I have not found that to be true by experience. I cannot explain it. I'm not a scientist, but I raise questions concerning that, because I don't believe it. It just doesn't feel right, doesn't make sense. Why does my soil completely do well after a few years of building it up naturally, taking care of it? I don't know. I know when I studied, some things in science don't make sense, because, for example, they don't teach it anymore, but back in the day when I was studying agronomy, they did that. Like earthworms, if earthworms become, with this method, with all the organic matter, earthworms go crazy, and so they just reproduce. They got food like crazy. The soil is full of organic matter, and that's what they love, and they're just everywhere. And so they go from almost no earthworms till you can't lift a shovel full of dirt without a bunch of earthworms falling out. And that is due to all this method. Now, what I was taught in agronomy, the classes I took back when I was a kid, they showed statistics of how much higher in all the different nutrients that the earthworm poop was, the manure, than what the dirt was that the earthworm made. Now, the question I raise is, if that's happening, then according to modern science, the nutrients are just coming out of nowhere. So I don't know. There's a whole lot in relation to the chemical industry and the pharmaceutical industry that doesn't make sense unless you follow the money. And hopefully I'm not touching any soft spots here, but that's what I believe. Some things just don't make sense. My dad went through medical school, and that's why I'm somewhat familiar with the whole medical field. And there's just a whole lot of bad stuff going on. I can tell you that. And if you want to stay healthy, stay away from doctors. But that's another topic for another day. So do the nutrients come out of nowhere? I guess they do. I don't have an explanation for that, but that's the closest conclusion that I can come to. So I would say keep it simple. Don't try to go out and get a whole bunch of stuff. If you're a farmer, you're growing some chickens, you're growing some goats or sheep, you got a few animals, you have the full cycle right there. You've got everything you need. You put that little bit of manure on there, and you get some caliche, some little bit of limestone. Like I get some caliche from Limbe Lime. They do agricultural lime. They just Limbe. They're here in Spanish Lookout. They like mine out of the hills, like the same caliche that they use for this limestone that they use for roads. But they sift out the powder, and they have two different types of lime. One is higher in magnesium, the other one's higher in calcium. So whatever your soil needs, whichever way it goes, mine needed the higher in calcium lime, and so I got some from them. But that's just locally sourced, comes out of the hills, and I put some on because the soil I've got here is Spanish Lookout. I call it Spanish Lookout gray clay. It's really nasty stuff. It's hard to work with, and everybody here in Spanish Lookout has always told me that it's impossible to grow vegetables here on this kind of soil. So it did need a little lime, so I got some lime in. That's really the only thing I brought in that wasn't sourced from the farm. And other than that, it was some manures, animal manures. I've got some beef here and some chickens and goats and sheep I've had, and so we use some of that manure. And other than that, it's just the grass, the mulch that we also mow right here on the farm. I have probably gone down a rabbit trail. I'm not sure. Yeah, I did the soil test to sort of confirm the deficiencies that I was told that this type of soil might have. But I did not bring in copper. I've been tempted to, and I could get in some elemental sulfur, which would be about as natural as it gets, and I wouldn't do any harm to the soil. But is it really necessary? I'm not convinced. The soil is getting better. It's already doing way better. I'm growing things this year that it wasn't able to last year. So that it tells me all I need to know. I don't. My focus again is not on the plant. It is on the soil. The plants actually help me know how my soil is doing. And so if I have a crop failure on something, it helps me know what's wrong with my soil and what I can continue doing in that particular plot of land. Rabbit manure, yes, rabbit manure is great fertilizer. I'd say any animal manure. One of the very best is actually bat manure. So if you have access to a cave somewhere and you can find a bunch of bat manure, you can't get better than that. You have to be careful not to use too much though, because it's quite strong. Good wood chips. Wood chips are not good for mulching. I explained why a little earlier, but I'll repeat myself. Wood chips, any kind of fiber requires nitrogen to break down. So wood chips only have fiber. Grass has enough nitrogen, also has fiber, but it's a softer fiber. It has enough nitrogen in itself to break down quickly, so it doesn't compete for nitrogen with the plants. Wood chips will compete with the plants for nitrogen, and since wood chips is stronger, it'll take the nitrogen out of the soil into the wood chip to break it down, and the plants will be yellow and spindly and will not have nitrogen. You'll have nitrogen deficiency, very severe nitrogen deficiency if you use wood chips, until the wood chips are broken down. But that can take years. For the wood chips to fully break down, it will eventually release back the nitrogen, but that's a long process. It's not worth it. Wood chips really don't have much value they only would have value as like an organic matter once they're broken down, but they don't add any fertilizer to the soil like grass would. Where I get good seed, I save about 50% of my own seed, especially on crops that are easy to save seed from. I started saving seeds from when I was a kid, and I looked into and studied seed saving and seed breeding. I don't really consider myself a breeder, but I do selectively save seed to continually improve my own varieties. So like, for example, if any of y'all have bought cherry tomatoes from me, those are seed that I have developed for some time already, and they are very good. They produce a lot of tomatoes. I'm guessing around 20 to 30 pounds, and they're sweet tomatoes. They're not acidic and sour. They're actually sweet. They're nice to eat just raw. The seed, about 50%, like I said, I grow myself. I select seed from the better plants to try to stay on top of things. I save seed from plants that produce more, have nicer cherry tomatoes, have less disease. I watch different things, and then I save seed from several different plants that I have selected, and then that seed is used for the next year or the next planting. The seed that I do not save are some seed that are harder to save, like cabbage. I'm not even sure if it works here in Belize, because from what I understand, most cabbage needs a winter. It needs to go through a winter, and then the next spring it busts open the head and sends out a seed head, like a flower shoot, and makes seed. And I'm not sure if that even happens here in Belize, but I could be wrong. I have not tried cabbage. I get my cabbage and lettuce and carrots and some of those smaller kind of seed I get from like Midwest Steel or from AgriPrec. AgriPrec is right beside Premier Homes on the way out of Spanish Lookout on Iguana Creek Road. AgriPrec also sells peat moss that I utilize for starting seeds. For starting seeds, you can make your own by rotting organic matter, and hay, or just making a compost, a very loose compost, and you can use that for starting seeds in starting trays. But it's easier. I just haven't had the time, and so lately I've just been using the peat moss. But they do have good seed. AgriPrec has the lettuce that we're just harvesting right now is lettuce called Kaiser, and very good lettuce, makes a very nice head. I've been very impressed with that. We've grown two crops of that already, and we've done very well. I do not remember what the organic matter percentage was in my soil. I don't remember that. It was very low, very compacted, very clay, very difficult to work with. And now I can just take a handful of soil in my hand, very loose, much better. So I haven't been as interested in that percentage, partly because I depend a lot on visually looking at it. Excuse me. We have here. Some question about the wee ants, the material they take out, and using that as a compost. Anything with organic matter, I'm sure should be good. I don't have any experience with the organic matter that the wee ants take out after they have grown their fungus in their nests. I'm not familiar with that. Any other questions? And please, if you would like to unmute and ask a question audibly, please do so at this time. So the seeds, and please, if anybody wants to just butt in. Yes.
Hello, I'm the person who asked about the ants and the thing. My soil is basically very heavy clay, and I have a fair amount of compost, so I want to use mixed up clay stuff that the ants take out to give the compost more body so that it stays together better than if not it washes away easily. So I'm trying to think of I could mix them together, that is bits, and so I just would serve any good purpose. Thank
Okay, I didn't. Can everybody hear me well? Yeah, thumbs up. All right. So I didn't quite hear the whole question. It was breaking up on me there. But what I would say, yes, anything more organic matter you can get in, the better. My focus is especially on simplifying the whole process. I want it to be possible for anybody to do. I want it simplified. And that's why I don't do. I have actually, even growing up, we never hardly played around with organic matter. We did it on a large scale. Sorry, not organic matter. I mean compost, making compost separately. Because technically what we're doing is we're composting in the field. All the organic matter we put on before plowing or during mulching is technically our whole field is our compost pile. All right. So that's why we don't do I don't do worm tea, worm compost, doing all this separate stuff outside the field. It's just more labor intensive and it makes more work. And why not just, like, how was it UB there at the Central Farm, and they do worm compost. And please, if somebody is on that's from there or knows about, don't be offended. I'm not, nothing personal. I think it's a waste of time. I think it's just it's a sad waste of time. Take all those nice worms and get this mulching thing going, get organic matter into the field, get manure out in the field, get the tilling done right, and spread those worms out in that field. Get the worms started growing, and let the worms make compost of the whole field. So, the whole field becomes your compost pile. You're not doing that extra work. It all happens automatically. Now, if you do already have compost, absolutely, compost is great, but you don't have to go to that extra work. But if you already have it, please, yes, of course, mix it in. Mix in another item that's good for mulching is, besides grass, probably the only other one that is worth mentioning. It would be leaves, tree leaves. Tree leaves also are very beneficial for the soil and as a compost. So I don't use tree leaves personally because it would be very labor intensive for me to gather up enough. I have a small tractor and a hay rake, and we rake up, and in no time we have the field mowed and raked and ready to spread on the other our vegetable garden. So it's grass makes more sense for me because of that. But tree leaves also break down quite readily for the most part, and have lots of nutrients in them for the plants. So but as far as the compost, any kind of leafy, like the wee ants, that is somewhat decomposed leaves, because that's what they use in their nests. And so it should be a good thing. I've never used it, but in a small garden, to mix it in with your compost, and then mix your compost in and just spread it on the soil and till it in. Absolutely. I mean, any kind of organic matter that breaks down readily. That's why wood chips and sawdust are not a good option. But anything that breaks down readily, like tree leaves or green grass, is great. And if you can get a lot of that into your soil, it's grass and mulch is nothing that is harsh to the soil. Doesn't have a high amount of nitrogen. It just slowly fixes the soil, and it slowly brings it back to a nice, loose, aerated, fluffy soil that roots love. Potatoes get big in, onions grow big in, carrots can sink their roots down in. Everything loves it, and so that's fairly important. There was something else I wanted to say. I don't quite remember. Anybody else would have some questions? For a high alkaline soil, there's a question here. It says, what would you recommend for high alkaline soil? I understand it's not good for plants. My soil here was actually a little high in, it was actually a little like a low pH, a bit acidic, which the lime helped a lot. But I will say with the pH is rectified oftentimes just by proper soil management. I don't have, I'm not sure just offhand what I would do other than, again, other than just the same process. When microbes take over and they're given enough food for life and for reproduction and for you know, populating the soil, they rectify a lot of those imbalances, and it's automatic. You know, we're talking very technically in a lot of these things. I'm trying to break it down so that most everybody can understand it, hopefully. But I'm also a Christian, and I love the Lord. I love the Lord with all my heart. And some of you all might not be, but and I don't want to offend anybody, but that's my position. That's my faith. From the beginning of God put Adam and Eve in the garden, and he didn't say, oh, and here's the pharmacy, and oh, here's the chemical store in case you need something. He didn't do that. He didn't give them all that knowledge. He told them to take care of the garden and to till it. That's what he said. He said to till the soil. And so the focus was on the soil from the very beginning. And that is what works. If we do these, if we take care of the soil and we till in organic matter or grass or whatever that grows, or leaves, it makes sense. And at the end of the day, it does all these technical scientific things that we wouldn't, unless we would have studied, we would not even known why it works. But it does. It's simple. It's a simple method. It's basically tilling, putting a few simple amendments right off the farm from your animals, and mulching. That's it. It's that simple. Yeah, we could have started this meeting. That's all I would have needed to say. But I wanted to explain to you guys why. And so that's why it has taken all this time, you know, to actually explain why. But at the end of the day, it's really just a simple process. It's nothing complicated. And so you might be saying, well, you didn't really tell us anything. That's exactly right. I didn't tell you much. But the reality is it's what works the best. Now you can go out there and you can make it super complicated for yourself. You can go out and make manure tea and compost and worm tea and neem oil and all these different organic pesticides and fungicides and herbicides and whatever else you want to try. You can make it as complicated for yourself as you want to, but I promise you won't be ahead of what I'm doing. It's just not better. The first bug to get scared and die and run off is the good bug, and it's also the last one to come back. So if you have a little bit of a bigger population of, let's say, whiteflies one year, if you don't try killing them, other than maybe using a little bit of yellow plastic or something with oil to stick them on to like mechanically work, you're not. If you do anything that'll hurt the good bugs, it's just going to prolong your problem. But if you let it go through the process, you still have a crop, because your plants will have all the energy they need to push right through, even with a little bit of bug pressure. But the following year, since you had food for the good bugs, they will overpopulate, and you might have several years with hardly any problems with bugs, until there's not enough food for those anymore, and it goes back through the same old cycle. But that's how it's always been. That's how it's been for thousands of years before chemicals came on the scene. It's like all of a sudden we're having to fight a new thing, like as if it was an old thing that's always been done, and it's not. It's a new thing that isn't needed. You know, it never was needed all these thousands of years. They've been professional seed breeders and developers have been growing healthy plants all these years, and all of a sudden we think that we can't do without chemicals. You know, or we don't, obviously. This group doesn't, but a lot of people think they have to do something about it. And I'm not saying that using some of these organic products is necessarily bad. Just be careful, be cautious. Don't be too quick to spray something. Think about what else it will affect in the whole ecosystem before you do it, because you could be hurting yourself more than helping yourself. So that's that. I would just say use a little caution. Now, I do some hand picking. Like, for example, tomato hornworms are sort of they're hard to find, but they're easy to keep under control just by hand picking. You find where the droppings are, you know where the worm is. You follow it straight up on the plant, and you find them. And if you pick them once a week or so, pick off. There's usually not many. There's just one here, one there. Then they won't overpopulate. You pick them off and you kill them, and by hand, and you can do a big greenhouse, keep it under control just fine with very little work. But there are some things like whiteflies, of course, that you can't do like that. But somebody told me about a trick that you can just put up some of this like yellow plastic that attracts them with a little bit of vegetable oil on it or something, and they'll come and stick on it. And with that, you can sort of keep them under control if you have problems with those in the peppers. There's another thing that helps a lot is planting like calendula or flowers or marigolds or basil. Basil is very good to plant alongside tomatoes. Tomatoes love basil. Basil loves tomatoes, and it deters the bed bugs. So you can do some companion planting. You can go on YouTube and find lots of information on what plants do well with others. And now there's certain vegetable plants that don't do well together, like cabbage and tomatoes. If you put cabbage close to tomatoes, you won't have any tomatoes, or at least not very well. So there's certain things that you don't want to put together, and it's important it would be it's essential to look into that and see what does well together. Let me see here. Any other questions? So I'm going to go a little bit into seed planting and seed saving. Okay, there's another question. Do you know of any sources to purchase plants ready to plant? Or like seedlings for veggie seedlings. There is a place, Bergen Nursery. I don't no, it's not. That's not the name. I'm not even sure what the name of the nursery is now. It's also like they have like a bookstore there here in Spanish Lookout where they do sell some vegetable seedlings. I can't vouch for those because I don't know what type of plants. I do a lot of trialing seeds myself to always stay on top of the market for seeds. There is a bit of a monopoly going on with the whole seed thing, and I want to fill you in a little bit about the seeds. Let's talk about that a little bit. First, I'll just want to answer that question. The seedlings, they do sell seedlings at a nursery it's a bookstore and nursery, garden nursery. If you up that road between Midwest Steel and the farm supply place.
Crossroads.
Yes, Crossroads. If you go up that road, take a couple turns, you'll come to a bookstore and a nursery. I don't remember the nursery right now. My apologies, but they do sell vegetable seedlings most of the time. You could give those a try. But I would, if you buy seedlings there, make sure you ask what the variety is, write it down, and keep track. If you don't like it, don't plant it again. Because there's a lot of people that plant old varieties of seed that just don't have the vigor and don't have they're just not good. They don't really produce. And a lot of these little, I call them Ace Hardware seeds, the little paper packets for the home gardener. Most of them are not the best. Reimer's Feed Mill sells some seed that are a little better. Trying to remember the name of the brand. Those are also in a paper packet. They are better than the normal run of Ace Hardware seeds, like the seeds that Midwest Steel sells in the paper packet. Don't buy those. What I prefer to do is go to one of the seed suppliers and ask what the local farmers, which varieties they've had the best feedback on, and then I will try those first and try a few others to see what I have the best success with. Now, speaking of seed, I'm completely anti-GMO. I hate GMO with a passion. I do not like GMO, and I don't want to ever plant anything that's GMO. Hybrid, I look at hybrid a little bit differently. Hybridizing is a natural process, completely natural process. It does not it has nothing to do with chemicals or with genetic modification whatsoever. I will say this: I am a huge fan of heirloom seeds, but heirloom seeds, if you're saving the seeds yourself every year and developing them, because if you don't, they do fall behind. Like let's take, for example, the big beef tomato. It's or beefsteak. Some of these names are old names that most of us know about. They were actually a variety. They were great. Can y'all still hear me?
Yes. Yes.
I just saw something happen to my internet, so just let me. Okay. All right. So this is what happens with all seed varieties for the most part. Seed breeders will continue. They will take, let's say, the big beef, and they'll save the best seed from the big beef. They'll select seed from that row of tomatoes, from the best plants, and they'll give it every couple of years. They'll give it a new name. All right, and then that one will become popular. And from the rest of the tomatoes in that same row, they'll save seed as well, but they'll still sell that still as big beef. All right, and so the older the variety, the more it's just taking seed from the whole row, and no selective seed saving. And so what ends up happening is your variety, big beef, goes down. It goes downhill and less productive, because the only seeds that stay productive are the ones that continually are selectively saved from the best plants. So what happens is big beef turns into some other name, and then in some other name, and it just continues continues and continually changes names. But sometimes originally its genetics go back to some of the same old varieties. And so if you in your garden, you take, for example, a tomato variety like Celebrity, which is supposedly a hybrid tomato, okay, and you save the best seed. You've saved the seed from the best plants, the nicest tomatoes, and you keep doing that for 2 or 3 years. That's exactly what the breeders are doing. And a few years later, they'll be calling it a new variety. So technically, you don't have Celebrity anymore. You have the new variety, because Celebrity they'll just keep saving seed from the rest of the row of plants that aren't as nice and aren't as productive. And so the breeders are staying on top of the game. They continually change the names so that they can continue making money. And the old varieties go downhill because they're not being selectively saved. Hopefully, I'm hoping that y'all understand. Many seed varieties are not hybrid in the sense that corn is a hybrid. For example, beans, there is no hybrid bean. It doesn't matter what kind of bean. By the very nature of beans, you can't hybridize them in the sense that they won't bear the same thing if you plant the save seed from it. There is no hybrid bean. They breed them, they cross them, they get better and better beans. But if you save that seed, you've got the exact same thing as they are saved. And it's the same with tomatoes. You can pretty much take almost any variety of tomato or pepper, and you can save seed from it, and you can start selectively saving, and you can stay on top of the game and save your own seed. You can take an old heirloom variety, do the same thing. That's what I did a lot. I would take an old heirloom variety like Cherokee Purple or There was a pink variety. I don't remember the name now. Very, very delicious tomatoes. I love heirlooms, and I would selectively save from those plants, and they would get better and better every year. You know, it'd become more and more like a hybrid, but with the same me saving for what I wanted to save. If I wanted to have a nice pink, fleshy, large, extra large tomato, I would save looking for that, and then and combine that with the plant that produces the most, and my seeds were improving every year. So breeding has a large part. If you want to save your own seed, you will be able to do a lot with your own seed. You can do as much as any breeder out there if you want to. With most of the seeds, like tomatoes, I save my own tomatoes, peppers, watermelons, cantaloupes, honeydew, squash, cucumbers, tomatoes. Most of those type of seed are very easy to save, and you can do it yourself. Yeah, Gary Reimer from Grandiflora. I think that is the name of the nursery. That's right. They do have some vegetables too. They had tomatoes and peppers, at least last I checked. But they probably don't have all the time. You could check there. I would still prefer getting my own seed, do my own research and getting my own seed, and going from there. I will say this: if you have a way to get seed down from the U.S., please check into Twilly's seed. They have very good seed and a very informative online catalog, or that you can get them to send you their hard copy. Twilly's is spelled Twilleys. Twilly's. There's the two other companies that we used to buy seed from. One is Johnny's Seeds, and the other is Rupp's Seeds. Rupps. Rupp's. Johnny's is just like, yeah, Johnny's. So all three of those, I believe all three of those have very high standards for non-GMO and keeping good seed. So, but make sure you check into that. I know Twilly's is, and I bought quite a bit of seed from Twilly's. There are certain varieties that do quite well. And here's the problem though. Most seeds, actually all seeds that you're going to buy in Belize or outside of Belize don't come from the country. They weren't saved here. They weren't bred here. And so you run into another problem. What is that? That is that they're not climatized for Belize. And so it's essential to save your own seed, because each year the seed you're saving, the varieties you're saving seed from, will become more and more climatized to Belize, and they'll do better. They'll be stronger against the heat. They'll do better against the rain. It changes them genetically slowly. Just like we us humans, sometimes it was hard for me at first when I came to Belize just to cope with the heat, you know. And so it's the same thing with plants. They will climatize as you save your own seed. A lot of people have asked me about saving extra seed to sell. It's a bit time consuming, and I might get into that, but it's better if you as the grower save your own seed. It is better for more than one reason. I would consider selling some, maybe eventually, or getting to the place where I can sell some seed. Now, if you buy tomatoes from me, gladly save the seed from them and start your own developing. If you buy peppers from me, please save the seed. Then you're getting seed from me that way. They might not be selective the first year, but after that, they'll be pretty close to the same that I have, you know. So especially if you save from some of the nicest, and you'll be pretty much saving the same thing I have. Any crop that I sell that matures, like that is actually mature, and if you actually want to save seed from a specific variety of something that I have or you're buying from and you really like to grow it yourself, please let me know, and I will try to help you get some seed. I might just end up giving it to you, but I obviously I can only handle so many, but I will give all my extra seed until I don't have any, but until I only have what I need myself. But I do save a lot of seed. But I'm not really looking at making that a business. I'd rather just give you some. If I have some extra, I'd rather just give you some. Um, so any other questions? I'm gonna look over my notes and I'll try to. I'd love to open it up for some discussion as well. I think that would be great. I'm not sure. Um, the director, I'm not sure what would be what she would prefer, if she'll be directing it, but I'll be done very soon, and I will be turning it back over to her. Let's see here. So we went through the soil preparation. There are obviously I know there's topics that I haven't touched on, but I've basically spoken about the main ones, the ones that are most important. There's other little interesting details that I love. I have a passion for gardening, and I pay a lot of attention to my plants and my soil. I love getting my hands dirty, and for me, it's a joy. Let's see here. Planting. There are certain with planting. There's certain things. This is maybe a topic for another day, but as concerns plant care, we have some plants you open seed, such as cilantro and carrots. You cannot transplant carrots. Don't ever try. The roots will go everywhere, and you will not have very nice carrots. Carrots do not like to be transplanted, because when they send down that taproot that eventually becomes the carrot, they don't want to be disturbed. If they are transplanted, you usually have just a whole ball of small, like a hairy ball of small roots, and very little carrot. Carrots will go sideways, or they're split up and make multiple taproots, and they just don't do well. They send one taproot down the center that becomes the carrot, and if you have nice, loose, fluffy soil, then they will make a nice carrot. All your root crops really love and need soil that is very aerobic, very loose, and also has lots of organic matter. Remember, every time you mulch and you plow back down that mulch after the crop, you're just adding so much more organic matter and fertilizer to the soil. So it's a very, very awesome. Mulching is my favorite topic. It is the single greatest help to growing things organically. But there are certain things that you have to direct seed, like carrots and cilantro and corn and a few things like that, that I would use. Maybe if I have some mulch laying around, I'll mulch after the plants are up and a little bit tall, where the mulch won't hinder them. I will put a little mulch in between the rows, but you don't necessarily have to mulch everywhere. When you rotate, even if one year or one planting a certain area of soil didn't get mulch, the next year, in the next planting it will, and so it won't be as much of a problem. We have some things are transplanted in trays, things like watermelons, cantaloupes, cucumbers, squash, tomatoes, peppers, cabbage, lettuce. Onions are seeded into a seed bed and then transplanted separately. Tomatoes, I think I mentioned that, and peppers. Many of those are planted and then transplanted into cells. I seed into an open tray, and then when they are just up nicely and have their first leaves, then I transplant them into cells, and then later when they're 2 or 3 inches tall, 4 inches tall, I transplant them into the soil out into the field, so they have a little better start. They seem to like that, and they get a little better care. They all get watered and everything stays. It's sort of like babying them in the nursery for a little bit before you plant them out. From the time I plant to the time I pick, there's very little done. I don't do much. I basically watch them grow. Some things like tomatoes, like staking, but another very huge benefit of mulching is that all your cucumbers don't necessarily need to be on stakes or strings. Your watermelons and cantaloupes and all your vine crops, they're not laying down on the soil. They're laying on top of the mulch, and so they stay nice and clean. It's clean. Picking is clean. You never get muddy. It's just clean, a nice clean walk through your garden. You don't ever have any mud. You don't have any. Another very important reason for mulching is that most of your blight and fungus are soil borne. And so if you put mulch in, it creates a barrier. The mulch creates a barrier for those funguses, because what happens is when it rains, there's a little bit of mud that splashes up on the leaves, and that is where a lot of those blights start. Those funguses start on the plants. And so mulching effectively creates a barrier to keep the fungus from splashing up onto the plants and starting to grow. So it creates that barrier and keeps everything clean. Mulch is just a wonderful thing. I mean, it's wonderful. So then at harvest, obviously the harvest time comes, and that's what we're all always looking forward to. Harvesting is our biggest. That's our most of our work is at harvest time. It's either soil preparation and then harvest. That's really the two things that take up the most of the time in the garden. And then, of course, last but not least, is not to forget to, as you start picking, already select the plants that you want to save seed from, and put a little red flag on them, or put a little ribbon on them, or something, so that you don't forget to leave them. And because what happens to me sometimes is I send the worker out to pick, or I go out to pick myself to sell, and all of a sudden, before I realized it, I'd picked off the vegetables that I wanted to save seed from, and I had sold them to somebody. So something to watch out for. You just put a marker on your plants. You're already watching it grow before the fruit gets ripe, and you're watching everything. You're seeing which ones you want to save seed from, and so and then you put a little marker on it, because you were wanting to watch those plants from the time they're small to the time they're big, how heavily they've loaded down with fruit, how their fruit set was, how big their fruit is. You want to cut a tomato, you want to taste it, you want to see how good it is, and you want to do everything that it takes to recognize which plants you want to save seed from, and then you mark them so that you don't lose that through picking. That it actually does go into seed, and then you're set for the next year. So that sort of concludes what I had, my notes, what I had down. I would gladly answer questions. It may be more information than what some of you can remember, but it's not a big deal. Just, I think you'll have the idea of it. You try to keep it simple. You do these basic things, and your soil, you keep your focus on the soil, not the plants. Don't go into a pure mode. Rather be on a prevention mode. Prevention, in as far as keeping a good soil, will prevent you from losing a crop. If you have good, healthy soil, you will get a crop. And so the chemical farmer, he pays less attention to the soil, and he just figures to spray whatever it takes to get a crop later. And that's more of a cure mentality. I like the prevention mentality. So I would say, let's do this. We can do it. Y'all can do it too.
Okay, does anybody have any other questions for Stephen? That's a lot to take out, but I like his concept of simple.
I do have a couple questions here on the question on the site, on the messages where I sell my veggies. If you save my number and send a message to me on my WhatsApp number, I can add you to the WhatsApp group, where you will receive weekly updates on what's available and at what price. I usually send an update out in the like on Mondays, so you can get your updates there. It's an administrators only group, because I don't want your inbox to get full of messages from everybody else. And so then what you would do is you would send me a private message directly to my number, private chat, and you would send me what you want, how much, and which day you would like to pick up, sometime between Monday and Friday. And then you would pick up your veggies at CC Farm. So that's the answer to that. Yeah, it is not recommended to transplant carrots. There are a number of things that you can't transplant, like corn or carrots or cilantro. Cilantro you might be able to, but it does better just directly seeded.
So Stephen, what could we plant with corn when we plant it to, like planting at the same time, plant beans or what to help keep the weeds down while the
Okay,
corn's
so
growing?
okay, yeah. So corn is you directly seed the corn, just on the
Yep.
flat, and then what you do after the corn is up about 8 inches, you lightly ridge it, just throw a little dirt around the corn. All right, just up on the hill. And if it's just a small sweet corn patch, yeah, I knock it out in half a day. I just get out there with a big old hoe and we ridge that corn up. Yeah, it's a little bit of work there. But we used to had cultivators that had ridges on it, and we just drive along. I grew up Amish, and we did all our work with horses. Even there in the U.S. with the Amish, most of them use chemicals. Our family, my dad said, we're just not doing chemicals. We're just not doing it. We're going to grow whatever we can organically, and that's what's going to be. And so there was several years into it in developing the market, along with other farmers that some were using some chemicals. They didn't use as much as what they do here in Belize, but they did use some. They asked us, what are you doing? You're getting better crops. Your vegetables look better. They're bigger. You're producing a whole lot more off the same field and all that. And we told them, well, first of all, just stop spraying chemicals, and they got mad and walked off. But that was they didn't like to hear it. Some of them did. Some of them changed, but it was, yeah. Can y'all still hear me? Can you still hear me?
Yes, it was a
Okay,
little
perfect.
garbled there on mine, but yes. So with the corn, so that's going to help keep the weeds away, is to ridge it?
Yeah, that destroys the weeds in the same, because the soil that you're moving from in between the rows to the middle of the row is uprooting the weeds in between the row and covering the weeds in the row. So that does take care of the small weeds if you do it before any weeds are very big at all. And then secondly, after that, what I've done, and works quite well, is something that actually the Indians came up with, was what they call the three sisters. You can do beans and squash right in the corn, planted at the same time, and they all grow up together and do just fine. I've had a huge crop of squash right in my corn, my sweet corn. The squash, everything did well together. About the time the sweet corn got ripe before the squash, I planted the squash in the corn row after the first hilling. So I put the seeds down after the first hilling, and because corn loves to be hilled slightly around the roots, it just does better. And to disturb the soil a little bit, and then I put squash in the row, like every other row, and some 4 or 5 feet apart, and they did very well. By the time the corn was harvested, the squash were almost covering up, and then the squash kept bearing for another month or so, and it worked very well. The Indians used to plant the squash farther apart, weeds mixed in as well. So the beans would bring back nitrogen into the soil for the corn, and they could plant on the same piece of ground year after year with no rotation whatsoever, just planting those three things together. So that is related to the subject of companion planting.
And any suggestions on getting rid of a grass? Because where I am, it was pasture. and there's pasture next to me. But in our corn, which is total, I guess, almost an acre, there's this grass that's grown up that it, it gets as tall as the corn plants and it takes over. Any suggestions for getting rid of it other than digging it out by hand?
So have you been tilling it properly?
Well, we've been tilling, and it keeps coming back.
Okay. There are certain kinds of grass that are pretty bad for gardens, and one would be like a Bermuda type of grass, which is a very fine bladed grass. It has narrow leaves and small narrow leaves, and makes long vines and just takes over very fast. That's a bit hard to get rid of, but I do so effectively just by tilling a little bit more. Like especially in dry season right now, if you till and then 2 weeks later you till again, it will kill it.
Okay,
It will kill it. But then what my problem is, if there's some of that grass
we'll do that.
around the borders of my garden, if there's some grass around the borders of the garden, it'll often sort of try to grow back in from the edges, you know. But mulching will also help. If you till it and then till it again and then cover it all up with mulch, most of the time nothing will come through that mulch. There will be nothing through that mulch. It will kill anything under it, and it will completely hinder any weeds from germinating because it stays dark. See, the whole purpose of weeds, naturally speaking, in nature, is to cover the soil. The soil does not want to be naked.
Mm-hmm. All right, we'll try that. Thank you.
Yeah. Speaking of mulching, it's important to put enough mulch on. I usually put, I would say 6 to 8 inches. When the mulch is all fluffy and dry yet, when you spreading it, it may look like you're putting it on about 6 to 8 inches thick. But when it rains, it all settles down, and you do want to wait to transplant till it settles down, because if you don't, the hay will be all over your plants, the wind will blow it around, and the plants will be sort of blocked down in a hole. And when you transplant, you want to make sure you pat down this hay around the plants so that there's nothing on the leaves or blocking the leaves, because plants do not like to feel like they're trapped in. They get like claustrophobic, you might say, and it does hinder their growth. So it's important to wait. We usually wait for a rain or a couple rains, and the hay is nicely matted down to about 1.5 inches to 2 inches thick, and then you can easily plant through it. And then also, if it had been dry when you last tilled, after a rain or two, what'll happen is the mulch, it'll be moist underneath. It'll have retained all that moisture. The rain will go right through the mulch, and it'll retain that moisture, and then you'll be planting right into soft, wet, moist dirt, and your plants will have the best start that they could possibly have.
Okay, all right. Well, unless anybody has any more questions, I'm gonna wind it down. Does anybody have any last questions for Stephen?
Okay, so we have a question here. Mombasa is a booger to get rid of. In my yard, I've used broken down cardboard boxes, but on the farm at large, we have a horrible problem when my husband had it. Okay, for cattle, it's wonderful. No, yeah. So yeah, Mombasa, it is hard to get rid of if you're not tilling. But after 1 or 2 tilling, I have no Mombasa left in my fields. It completely destroys it. I do have a rototiller that I have used on occasion, that I do use some. Rototillers tend to compact a little bit more, so I use it sparingly, but I do use it, and that completely destroys Mombasa. It just completely tears up the sod and kills it. And so Mombasa is best taken care of with a rototiller. It does completely destroy it. So, but yes, for cattle it's great, and I really love the Mombasa for mulch. That is the mulch I'm using, is the Mombasa, because it grows back fast. It has a lot of tonnage per acre, and it does not have seeds. Like, it's just not a very seedy. Oh, and the other thing is there's some grasses that when you mow it, it actually has like vines that can root down at every joint. Mombasa does not have that. It's only a leaf. It never resprouts. Even if I spread Mombasa on my garden in the middle of rainy season and it's raining every day, it does not sprout back. Like, it will not grow. It won't root. It cannot root because it has nowhere that it can root. It just dies and rots. There are some other grasses like Bermuda and vining grasses that if you mow it, you'll be mowing off whole segments of stems that will reroot if it's raining all the time. So then you're going to have a huge problem in the field, because all that mulch that you put on will just all of a sudden sprout up and you'll have a grass field. So Mombasa is very good. Or even if you have a bagger on your lawnmower, you can use the lawn grass, because it won't reroot, because you're only mowing off the little leaves that are coming up at the top. So that's a little observation that I would have about mulch. You want to be careful you're not putting out something that's going to completely seed or completely grow up in your garden.
Okay. All right, so we will wrap this up, and just to let everybody know, a reminder, this will be posted on our website. Usually Karen gets it up there early next week, so you can go and rewatch it, because there was a lot of information, a lot of very good information. So a good way to capture more of it is to just go in and rewatch it, or the parts that you need. So that will be available on the pro-organic Belize.org website next week. And a reminder that our annual general meeting will be on Saturday, April 15th at 10 a.m. at the Bluff. It will also be held via Zoom for those who can't make it to the Bluff, and you'll get a link for that. So that's where the meeting, once a year, that we'll vote on the new board and take care of business for the year. So we hope to see you there. And our next speaker meeting will be on May the 6th. It will be Oliver. I'm doing this from memory now. Let me see here. Okay. Oscar Morales and Janice Wani. I'm saying that right, on growing and processing coconuts into many products. So that will be of great interest, I'm sure, for a lot of people, what to do with all those coconuts. So please join us for that on May the 6th. And we thank you so much, Stephen, for all of your very valuable information on a grand scale. Thanks a lot.
Hey, thanks everyone. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much, and everybody have a wonderful rest of your weekend and a very blessed Easter weekend next week. Thank you.